Judicial Service Commission is holding another round of interviews for judges. New interviewing guidelines will be implemented with the aim of strictly determining legal knowledge. Let's unpack this further with legal expert Elton Hart. Elton, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time today. Freedom Under Law issued a report sometime last year calling for a system overhaul in how judges are being appointed. I suppose there are new guidelines now being put in place. But key amongst the issues that they were talking about was the 23 members, 8 of them had legal training. So people selecting judges, their own experience around legal matters was coming into question. What did you find was the system today?
No, for me, it's like always, if you look at it and if you say a person, and it's either here or there. Sometimes a person could not necessarily have legal training, but he has an eye to actually spot a good candidate when he sees a good candidate. But sometimes it helps a little bit more, especially with the legal jargon that's normally thrown around in the JSC and the questions pertaining that is put to candidates, that you should have legal training. But legal training or the qualification, it's not just confined to what we call academic qualifications, because people think about qualification and they think, okay, I need to have a degree, I need to have a master's degree, or I need to have a doctorate. But there's also like your years of experience in practice, because you also learn things in practice, what we say practical legal training. Yeah. The skills that you over the years pick up as to how to deal with certain matters. So that is all the things that should be and must be involved in selection of judges, because you deal with very complex matters that can drag for months. So you need to have that skill that you have learned, and it's not something that's written in a book. It's something that has been perfected over years by practicing and doing it. Yeah. And that's where I think we should be looking at.
So what I think why that was brought about also in part, I mean, there could have been other technical issues, but in part was the fact that we saw in some of the now very public interviews of judges the airing of political agendas, the inconsistency in the questioning of the candidates, and others then tend to say, well, some of these questions actually have got very little to do with the legal matters and judgments and type of things, but more to do with political agendas that are being thrown about.
No, indeed so, and that is the danger that lurks in this 23-man panel that sits there to actually interview candidates for judicial positions. Because obviously a person also now, if you're not politically aligned to certain parties, you know already you're going to get a tough time in these interviews. And that's the nature of the beast, how it was created. But for me, the question should be, are you constitutionally qualified, an appropriate person to actually hold a position of judge? Because if you are appointed as a judge in terms of the Constitution, that's a lifetime appointment. Even if you retire, you still remain a judge. So is the person fit and proper? Is the person independent? And does he have the appropriate qualifications? And I think I already touched on the qualification. And that's more or less where they need to look at. They need to treat the candidates with respect. And you see a lot of these questioning that comes in that's unfair, that they ask people about their personal lives. Apart from being a legal professional, be it you're a magistrate, a judge, or an attorney or an advocate, you also have your private life. And sometimes, yes, it's difficult to sever these two, but you should not try and drag these two and blur the lines. And that's what some of these politicians that sits on the JSC do not understand. They try and blur it. And even if you're a judge, you are allowed to have a political view. You are allowed to vote. Even if you vote for whatever party you're voting for, it's nothing to do with the interview. So, oh, you voted for X party. Why did you vote for X party? Because he's from Y party. That should not be one or some of the questions that should be allowed in these types of interviews. They should strictly stick to the job. What is the job? Are you independent? Are you fit and proper, properly qualified? And also, you have the appropriate qualifications. That's where they need to stick with questions pertaining to what work have you done previously as a judge or a magistrate. If you're going now for the labor appeal court or the Supreme Court of Appeal position, the higher courts, or if you come now to the high courts, what work have you done as a regional magistrate or a district magistrate pertaining to writing judgments, writing your judgments timelessly, how you wrote your judgments, how you handled yourself in court, how you handled yourself outside court, within the work arena. I'm not talking about when you're at work, maybe you're watching a football match, you are allowed to scream, but when you're at work, do you treat the work with the necessary decorum and respect, and also your colleagues in the same area?
So we are, of course, also looking at the fact that we have a long-standing vacancy finding the Constitutional Court, but this is not what we are looking at now. There seems to be more urgency this time to fill in the other vacancies in the other courts, Labour Court, Labour Appeals Court, High Court, as well as the SCA. And so much so, others are saying, well, you've got two front runners, certainly in this instance, who could have been potential candidates for the Constitutional Court, but now having to throw their heads in the ring for the job of the SCA. That's Judge Faiza Kathri Situlwane, as well as David Unterholter.
No, indeed. So, and I mean, but for me, the SCA is the highest court of appeal, and I don't necessarily think, okay, if you're in the Constitutional Court, it's the highest court when it comes to constitutional matters. But at the SCA, if something does not have a constitutional component, the buck stops there. So most of the cases end up there, and the SCA is actually the court that gives like sort of body to the South African case law, if one can put it that way. So it is one, I would even say sometimes for me it's more important than the Constitutional Court, because only if there's a constitutional matter that jumps out, then it goes to the Constitutional Court. But a lot of these tough disputes, precedent-setting disputes, is settled in the SCA. So throwing their heads in there, they are also going to be called justice, just like in the Constitutional Court. You're just sitting in a different city. You're sitting in Bloemfontein, not in Gauteng. And I would prefer to sit in Bloemfontein at this point in time, because you know Gauteng, the roads explode. So Bloemfontein is the safest city, Tabo.
Indeed. The other, of course, bearing question is the question, which is rather constitutional, coming to think of it, because the Constitution demands it. So the question of race and gender representation, how are we looking in terms of the candidates that we've got vying for these positions this time around in our judiciary?
I looked at the candidates, Tabo, and I still see it's still male-dominated. The shortlist, it's still male-dominated. There's not so much females in there. And currently, if we look at the output rate for universities, there's more females coming out of university with legal qualifications than males. But still, the industry is dominated by males. And even if I look back at how Justice Maya, when she was properly qualified, he had to actually now go through rigorous and vigorous sort of half cross-examination type of style, where she had to explain herself as a female. And she has proven it for 15 years or odd at the SCA, which is the highest appeal court. It has a big caseload, that she is a capable woman, and still a woman in this day and age in 2023 still has to say why as a woman they would fare better than a man, and not just say why you as a candidate would fare better as a man. But I think the representation of females in our judicial system or judiciary, as well as in the magistracy, should drastically change to actually adhere to the constitutional requirement that says it must reflect race and gender. So for me currently, the race and gender spread is not totally, they're moving in that direction, but it's so far from where it's supposed to be.
Elton Hart, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Legal expert there, Elton Hart, looking at those SCA interviews as well as High Courts and the Labour Court and Labour Appeals Court candidates being interviewed there.